You are not my real family. My real family is his. You're nothing to me." Those were the words my daughter Emily spit into the microphone at her own wedding reception, her white dress glowing under the chandelier lights while every pair of eyes in that crowded hall snapped toward me. The champagne flute in my hand froze halfway to my lips. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. All around me, silver forks clattered against porcelain plates. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and the soft jazz that had been playing in the background seemed to evaporate into the air. I was the mother of the bride. The woman who had raised her worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table, sacrificed vacations, birthdays, and even my health, so she could have every opportunity. Yet here I was, 71 years old, sitting at the corner table with my granddaughter Lily by my side, listening to my only daughter disown me in front of 200 guests. Gasps rippled across the room. Some people tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe it was a joke, but Emily's smile was sharp cruel, not the kind a bride wears when she teases her mother. No, she meant every word. She turned to the groom's side of the family, his parents in their tailored suits, his wealthy uncles with Rolexes flashing under the lights, his sisters dripping in diamonds. This is my true family now. They are the ones who respect me, who understand me. Not her. She jabbed a finger toward me as though I were some intruder who had slipped into the hall uninvited. My throat tightened. I tried to swallow but couldn't. From the next table, I heard someone whisper, "Is that her mother?" The word mother sounded like a curse. Lily. My 14-year-old granddaughter gripped my hand under the table. "Grandma, don't cry. Please." Her voice trembled, but her fingers were fierce around mine like she was holding me together when I was ready to collapse. The priest, Father Thomas, who had just officiated the ceremony less than an hour earlier, stood frozen near the stage, his Bible clutched to his chest. His brows furrowed as if even he, a man used to hearing confessions of betrayal, couldn't believe what had just been said. Emily's new husband, Andrew, shifted uncomfortably beside her. He didn't stop her. He didn't pull her hand down from the mic. He simply let her continue as though this humiliation were a part of the evening's entertainment. My chest burned. Years of memories rushed back the time I sold my wedding ring just to pay Emily's tuition bill when the scholarship fell short. The night I worked double shifts at the nursing home, coming home with my feet swollen only to wake up at 5 a.m. to pack her lunch for school. The mortgage payments I scraped together on our tiny house in Cleveland while she dreamed of something bigger, fancier, shinier. And now in a banquet hall I had partially paid for $18,400 to be exact, borrowed from my retirement account. She never knew about my daughter was cutting me off like an unwanted branch from a family tree. The room buzzed with whispers. A cousin avoided my eyes. A neighbor from church saw Nimes Evans shifted uncomfortably in her seat. And then came the final blow. Emily leaned closer to the mic, her eyes locked on mine. "You're not needed anymore. Don't even think about calling me after tonight. This is goodbye." The crowd erupted. Some gasped, some laughed nervously, some just stared at me like I was a ghost already buried. I felt the walls closing in the chandeliers above, pressing down. My vision blurred. And for the first time in 71 years, I truly felt invisible. But then, Father Thomas cleared his throat. His voice steady and calm sliced through the chaos. Before this reception continues, he said, stepping onto the stage, "There is one letter I was asked to read. A letter from the mother of the bride. It was entrusted to me weeks ago." Every head turned again, this time toward the priest, then toward me. My letter. The one I had written late one night, tears staining the paper when I realized the truth about Emily's choice of husband and the storm that was about to break. The hall went silent. Even the clink of glasses stopped. My daughter's smirk faltered just for a second. And as Father Thomas unfolded the paper with deliberate slowness, I felt the air shift. The humiliation still burned in my chest, but somewhere deep beneath it, a tiny flame of defiance flickered. Because this was not the end, not by a long shot. My name is Margaret Harris, and I am 71 years old. But if you ask my daughter Emily, she will tell you, I am nothing more than an aging burden, a fragile woman clinging to memories that no longer matter. She doesn't remember the nights I came home from Miller's Diner at 2 a.m. The smell of grease and burnt coffee clinging to my uniform, my hands cracked from washing dishes, my feet blistered from standing 12 hours straight. She doesn't remember how I'd tiptoe into her room, kiss her forehead, and whisper, "It's all for you, baby." Every bit of it. I was only 23 when her father walked out, leaving me with a mortgage, a toddler, and $200 in a checking account. People said I wouldn't last a month, that the house would be repossessed, that I'd end up back at my parents' place in Dayton with my tail between my legs. But I didn't. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple. I skipped meals so Emily could have her lunchbox full for school. I sold my wedding ring for $1 and $200 just to pay her tuition when she begged me to let her go to that private academy uptown. She never knew the price. She only knew she got what she wanted. There was no me for decades, only her. My life became a rhythm of bills and overtime. Rent, utilities, school fees, car repairs on that rusty old Ford Taurus I drove into the ground. When other women my age were going on vacations, I was patching holes in my roof with tar because I couldn't afford a roofer. When my coworkers at the nursing home asked about my weekends, I lied and said I liked staying in. The truth, I couldn't spare the gas money for a trip out of Cleveland. Still, I never complained, not once. Because I I knew that one day Emily would see the sacrifices, that she would hold my hand and say, "Mom, you gave me everything. I'll never forget it." Instead, I got the opposite. The older she grew, the more she wanted to escape the small life I had fought tooth and nail to hold together. The little 2-bedroom house with peeling wallpaper wasn't enough. The used Honda I bought her at 17 wasn't good enough. She looked at me the way some people look at old furniture, something functional once now just taking up space. And when she met Andrew, everything changed. Andrew came from money. Not Rockefeller money, but enough his parents owned 3 rental properties and a beach house in Florida. He wore loafers that cost more than my entire week's paycheck. He talked about investments, stocks, and business trips to Chicago. Emily's eyes lit up in a way I had never seen before. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at the life he represented. And that's when I started to disappear from her world. She stopped coming by the house except when she needed something. She stopped answering calls unless it was about money. Birthdays went by with nothing more than a text. On Christmas, she gave me a scented candle and spent the evening at Andrew's parents' mansion. I told myself not to be bitter, that maybe this was just what life was. Children grow, they move on, they build their own families. But still, wasn't I her family? Hadn't I earned at least a shred of respect after everything? Sometimes late at night, I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at the stack of bills. $842 left on the mortgage. $3,200 on the credit card. And I would think of all the hours I worked, all the sweat, all the pieces of myself I gave away. For what? For this moment where she could stand in a hall filled with 200 people in a wedding I partly paid for and declare that I was nothing. I wasn't rich, I wasn't glamorous, but I had clawed my way through 71 years with dignity. And even if Emily refused to see it, I knew who I was. I was the woman who never let the lights go out, who kept food on the table even when the fridge looked bare, who raised a daughter single-handedly without ever once letting her feel the crushing weight of poverty on her back. Yes, I am 71. My hair is white, my hands are wrinkled, my back aches when I bend to pick up laundry. But I am not weak. And on that wedding night when Emily spat venom into a microphone and dismissed me like trash, she had no idea that the woman she thought she had crushed still had one final move to play. She had no idea that while she was busy building her new life in someone else's mansion, I had been quietly protecting something far more valuable than she or Andrew could ever imagine. The wedding hall should have been a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain above us, the tables covered in silk cloth centerpieces bursting with roses and orchids. Waiters in black vests moved like shadows carrying silver trays of champagne flutes and shrimp cocktails. Laughter floated in the air like bubbles until my daughter opened her mouth and pierced it like a knife. You see, in most weddings, the mother of the bride sits at the front glowing with pride, her dress carefully chosen, her seat honored. But not me. Emily had pushed me to the back corner at a table near the kitchen doors, where the waiters bustled in and out. She said it was more convenient. Convenient for her perhaps to hide me like an old stain she didn't want anyone to notice. I didn't complain. I sat with Lily, my granddaughter, who tried to make me smile by stealing extra bread rolls from the basket and piling them on my plate. "For you, Grandma," she whispered, her small act of kindness a lifeline in that glittering sea of cruelty. From my seat, I watched Emily move around the room, her white dress sweeping the floor, her hand clutching Andrew's arm as though he were the prize she'd been waiting her whole life to claim. She laughed at his parents' jokes, clinked glasses with his uncles, and accepted compliments from strangers like a queen. When one of Andrew's cousins asked, "Where's your mother?" Emily waved her hand dismissively toward my corner. "Oh, she's back there somewhere. Don't worry about it." The words stung more than I can describe. Back there somewhere. As though I were not a person, but an afterthought. Still, I bit my tongue. For Lily's sake. But then came the moment that tipped everything into the open. The master of ceremonies, a tall man with a booming voice, invited Emily and Andrew to the stage for their first speech as a married couple. Emily grabbed the microphone with a confidence that startled even me. She looked radiant, but her smile was razor sharp. "I want to thank my real family." She began, her gaze sweeping over Andrew's parents, his sisters, his cousins. "The people who welcomed me with open arms, who gave me everything I always dreamed of. You are my true home." There was polite applause, clinking glasses, nods of approval. And then she turned her eyes locking on me and added, "Unlike someone who only dragged me down, someone who could barely pay the bills, who embarrassed me in front of my friends, who lived in a shabby house with peeling paint. That was not a family. That was survival. And I'm done surviving." The room fell into silence. Forks hovered midair. A guest at the next table dropped his napkin and didn't bother to pick it up. My breath caught. Even after everything, I hadn't expected her to say it outright. I wanted to disappear, but disappearing wasn't an option. 200 pairs of eyes were already drilling into me, their curiosity burning holes through my skin. Lily pushed her chair back suddenly, her voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "Don't talk about Grandma like that." The words rang out, trembling but fierce, cutting through the hush. Heads turned toward the little girl in her pale blue dress, her curls bouncing as she stood up. "She raised you. She gave you everything. And you're just..." Her voice broke and tears welled in her eyes. Emily's smile faltered for half a second before she leaned into the microphone and laughed coldly. "Children should stay out of grown-up matters." Andrew's family chuckled awkwardly. One of his uncles muttered drama under his breath. The humiliation pressed heavier on me than ever. My own daughter had publicly stripped away every shred of dignity I had, and even my granddaughter's defense was brushed aside like meaningless noise. Mrs. Evans, my neighbor from church, sat a few tables away. She caught my eye and mouthed, "Don't let them break you." Her presence was a small flicker of light in a room full of shadows. But the damage was done. Emily handed the microphone back to the MC, her head held high, her hand still clamped onto Andrew's arm. The applause that followed was thin, forced, like people clapping because they didn't know what else to do. I sank deeper into my chair, my chest burning with shame, my heart begging me to run. Yet somewhere deep inside, another part of me whispered, "Stay, watch, don't leave yet." Because this was no longer just a wedding. It was a battlefield. "Don't sit there like you belong," Emily's voice cut across the hall again, sharper now, dripping with venom. She wasn't even holding the microphone anymore. She didn't need it. Everyone was already watching her, waiting for the next dagger to fly. "Mom, you don't fit here. This isn't your world. Look around." She swept her hand toward the glittering tables, the polished marble floor, the chandeliers gleaming overhead. "Do you see any place for someone like you? A woman who spent her life in greasy diners and secondhand clothes?" The guests shifted in their seats, embarrassed. Some looked down at their plates. Others stared openly at me as if the spectacle were part of the evening's entertainment. I wanted to stand. I wanted to tell her enough was enough. But before I could gather my breath, she pressed harder. "You always said you worked so hard for me," Emily sneered. "But the truth..." You dragged me down. You kept me in that shabby little house on Maple Street with its broken shutters and that sagging porch. Do you know how many times my friends laughed at me when they dropped me off there? Do you know how many times I wished you weren't my mother?" Her words cracked like a whip across my skin. Andrew stood beside her, saying nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward his parents as though silently begging them to approve. And they did. His mother gave the faintest nod, a smug little smile tugging at the corners of her lips, as if Emily's cruelty was confirmation that her son had married into better stock. Lily gasped. She clutched my arm. "Grandma, don't listen. Please don't listen." Her voice quivered, but I could feel her tiny body trembling with rage. "Emily, enough," I whispered under my breath, though she couldn't hear me over the pounding silence. But Emily wasn't finished. "Let's be honest," she said, her laughter ringing bitterly. "You can't even handle your own life." Bills stacked to the ceiling, always begging for extensions, always one step away from having the house taken away. You're nothing but a parasite, Mom. You've survived off scraps, and now you want to sit here and pretend you're part of something bigger. The word parasite echoed in my head like a gunshot. My hands shook in my lap. I could feel every eye drilling into me, neighbors, relatives, strangers. Some pitied me, others enjoyed the scene like vultures circling a dying animal. Mrs. Evans, bless her, slammed her hand against the table and muttered loudly, "Shame on you, Emily." But her voice was just one against the tide. Emily raised her chin triumphant as if she had won some twisted prize. Then with deliberate cruelty, she waved her hand toward me and spat the final insult, "Don't sit at my table. You don't belong there. Not today. Not ever again." The MC froze, unsure whether to continue. Waiters lingered awkwardly near the doors, clutching their trays. The band stopped mid-song. The humiliation was complete. In that moment, I wasn't Margaret Harris, mother of the bride. I wasn't the woman who had fought through decades of hardship to raise her daughter. No, I was the outcast, the discarded, a living ghost at a celebration I had partly paid for, and Emily made sure everyone knew it. Lily stood up again, her little fists balled. "Stop it. She's your mother. How can you say that?" Tears streaked down her cheeks, but she stood tall, glaring at her own mother as though she were the only adult in the room. Emily snapped back without hesitation. "Sit down, Lily. Or do you want to join her at the losers' table?" The guests gasped again. A cousin hissed under his breath, "That's too much." But no one dared step forward. My body felt heavy, pinned to the chair by shame. I wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the floor. Yet inside me, something stirred. Something old, something fierce. I wasn't just humiliated, I was cornered. And when you corner a woman who has survived on nothing but grit and scraps for 71 years, you should never forget, she still knows how to fight. I swallowed the burn in my throat, forcing myself to breathe steady. My hands stopped trembling. I sat upright, staring at Emily across the hall, not with tears, but with fire. She thought she had destroyed me in front of 200 witnesses, but she didn't know what was coming next. Not yet. Just when I thought Emily's words had already cut me to the bone, the evening twisted even darker. The MC tried to steer the night back toward normality, clearing his throat, forcing a smile, announcing that the couple would now open their gifts of love and blessings. Guests clapped awkwardly, relieved for a distraction. Wrapped boxes and envelopes began piling on the stage, each carrying the weight of congratulations and expectation. Then Andrew's mother, Patricia, stood, a tall, severe woman with pearls that gleamed like icicles against her neck. She tapped her wine glass with a fork until silence fell again. "Before we continue," she said smoothly, "there is a matter of property we should acknowledge. It is customary, after all, for family to support the bride and groom as they begin their new life together." Her words were polite, but her eyes, those cold, assessing eyes, landed directly on me. Emily beamed. "Yes, Mom," she said, her voice syrupy as she leaned into Andrew's side. "Let's tell everyone about the gift." A murmur swept the hall. "A gift? What gift?" And then Patricia said it. Clear, sharp, merciless. The Maple Street house. Margaret has agreed to sign it over to Emily and Andrew as a wedding present. My stomach dropped. The room gasped. What? The words scraped out of my throat, raw and disbelieving. Emily's smile widened her eyes, sparkling with triumph. Don't act surprised, Mom. You promised. Remember. You said one day the house would be mine. Well, today is that day. My head spun. Yes, I had once told her long ago when she was a teenager dreaming of a bigger life that everything I owned would eventually pass to her. But promise is not the same as today. Not the same as tearing the ground from under my feet while 200 strangers watched. That's my home, I whispered. My home. I still live there. Emily tilted her head, pity dripping from her smile. You don't need it anymore. You'll be better off in something smaller. A retirement apartment. It's time to let go. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. You can visit on holidays. Laughter rippled through Andrew's side of the family. My chest burned hotter than fire. Visit my own house. Patricia clapped her hands once sharply as if sealing the matter. We have the papers ready. Our lawyer is here tonight. And like a snake slithering from the shadows, a man in a navy suit stepped forward, carrying a sleek black folder. He placed it on the table in front of me with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. Inside, I glimpsed the deed to my house, the only asset I truly had. Paid off bit by bit across 40 years of labor, patching roofs, scrubbing floors, skipping meals. Every corner of that house was carved from sacrifice. And now here it was, reduced to an item on the menu of Emily's new life. Just sign, Mom, Emily said sweetly. Make it official. Don't embarrass me in front of everyone. The lawyer slid a pen across the table. 200 guests leaned forward, watching like vultures, circling carrion. Lily clutched my hand so tight I thought her small fingers might snap. Grandma, don't do it, please. Her eyes were wide, fierce, begging. Mrs. Evans shook her head at me from across the room. Don't you dare. But Emily's voice pressed harder, sharper. If you don't sign, you'll regret it. No more phone calls, no more visits. You'll die alone in that crumbling house and nobody will even know. Her words were acid. They seared straight through my heart. The guests gasped again, shocked at her cruelty. A man at the bar muttered, "Good God." But no one interfered. I stared at the pen, at the papers, at Emily's triumphant face glowing under the chandeliers. In that moment, I felt cornered, trapped, destroyed. 40 years of sacrifice reduced to a single piece of paper, I was expected to surrender like a beggar throwing away the last crust of bread. My vision blurred. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, and for the first time in my life, I wondered, maybe this was it. Maybe everything I had built, everything I had fought for was about to be ripped from my hands. Maybe I truly had nothing left. I pressed my trembling fingers against the pen. The room held its breath. Emily leaned closer, her voice low but sharp enough for me alone. Sign it, Mom, or this family, your family, is gone forever. My hand shook above the page. The weight of humiliation, betrayal, and fear pressed down harder than ever before. And then, just as my fingers brushed the paper, I felt something else stir inside me. Not fear, not despair, the kind of rage only a mother who has been dragged through the mud, spat on, and discarded can know. I didn't sign. Not yet. But in that moment, one thing crystallized in my heart. If they wanted war, they were going to get it. The pen lay in front of me, gleaming under the lights like a weapon aimed at my heart. I didn't touch it again. I couldn't. My fingers curled into my lap, fists trembling, while the lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside me, waiting for the signature that never came. The voices around me blurred into background noise, laughter from Andrew's side of the family, the scrape of a fork, the soft thud of a waiter's tray being set down. Everything felt distant, muffled, like I was slipping underwater, and in that silence my mind carried me backward. Back to the first day I moved into the Maple Street house. The paint was peeling, the roof leaked when it rained, and the furnace groaned like it was dying. But it was mine. Mine and Emily's, a place where she could grow up with her own room, with walls we could paint any color we wanted. I remember sitting on the bare living room floor with her 2 slices of pizza between us and promising her, "This is our castle baby. Nobody can take it away from us." I thought about the nights I rocked her to sleep, when fevers rattled her tiny body, whispering prayers to God that she would live to see another sunrise. About the mornings I stood in line at the food pantry, my coat pulled tight against the Cleveland winter, just so she would have cereal and milk. I remembered her first day of high school, how she cried when the other kids laughed at her thrift store shoes. That night, I worked an extra shift at the diner, came home with blisters on my feet, and bought her a pair of Nikes with money I didn't have. She never asked where it came from. She just smiled the next morning, walking taller. And then college. The tuition bills stacked higher than the ceiling. I sold the last pieces of jewelry I had from my mother. I begged the bank for extensions. I cleaned hospital bathrooms at night, scrubbing tiles until my back screamed. Every dollar went into her future. I thought of Christmas mornings when I wrapped secondhand toys in shiny paper so she wouldn't notice the scratches. Of birthdays when I baked lopsided cakes because store-bought was too expensive. Of the time she wanted a violin and I pawned my wedding ring to buy it. She played that violin in her first recital, smiling so wide, I thought my heart might burst. All those sacrifices, all those years of holding up the world with nothing but my bare hands, and now she stood on a stage draped in silk and lace, pretending none of it happened. Parasite. The word rang in my ears again. Was that truly what I was? A parasite? No. I was the woman who survived the unthinkable. I was the woman who made a life out of scraps, who kept the lights on when there was no money, who never let her child go to bed hungry even when I did. If that made me a parasite, then the world had lost its mind. A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips, but I swallowed it back. Not here, not yet. Because while Emily thought she had broken me, she didn't know the truth. She didn't know about the nights I sat at that old kitchen table poring over bills and paperwork, learning things she thought I was too stupid to understand. She didn't know that behind every sacrifice I had kept, something small, quiet, hidden. My husband may have left me with nothing but debt and a baby, but he also left me one thing, a lesson: never put all your trust in anyone, not even family, especially not family. It was a cruel lesson, but it stuck. So while Emily thought she was stripping me bare in front of 200 witnesses, she didn't realize that I was not as fragile as I looked. Yes, I was tired. Yes, I was old. But I was not weak. The Maple Street house was only one chapter. She thought taking it would destroy me, but she had no idea about the other chapters I had written quietly in ink she had never seen. My chest rose and fell with steady breaths now. The shame still stung, but beneath it burned something steadier. Resolve. Emily didn't know it yet, but every insult, every act of betrayal was only digging the grave for her own downfall. I sat straighter, ignoring the stares, ignoring the whispers. The lawyer cleared his throat, shifting the papers closer, but I pushed them gently back with the tips of my fingers. "Not tonight," I said softly. My voice shook, but not from weakness, from restraint. Emily's face twisted. She leaned down, her hiss, sharp as broken glass. "You'll regret this, Mom." Perhaps, but not in the way she thought. Because in the shadows of my past, in the decades of hardship she had dismissed as weakness, I had been quietly forging a strength she couldn't imagine. And one day soon, that strength would come for her. The wedding hall hummed again after my quiet refusal, though the laughter was thinner now, forced. Emily's smile tightened, the kind of smile that hides fury behind perfect white teeth. Andrew's mother whispered something in her ear, and Emily nodded, her eyes flashing toward me like daggers. They thought they had me cornered. They thought it was only a matter of time before I broke. But what Emily didn't know, what no one in that glittering hall knew, was that I had already prepared for this moment. Weeks before the wedding, when the invitations were still warm in people's hands, I had sat at my kitchen table late into the night. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence as I held a pen above a stack of paper. Not bills this time, not court notices. Something else entirely. A letter. Every word written by my hand, every truth I had swallowed for years poured out in ink. It wasn't just a letter to Emily. It was a letter to everyone who would stand there in that church, clinking their glasses, smiling politely, pretending they knew who she was. a letter to the priest, a letter to Andrew's family, a letter to myself. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it into Father Thomas's hands 2 Sundays before the wedding. His kind eyes studied me, questioning, but he didn't pry. He simply nodded, pressing my hand in reassurance. If the day comes, I told him, my voice breaking, you'll know when to read it. And now watching Emily strut in her wedding gown, humiliating me in front of strangers, I knew that day had arrived. Father Thomas stood at the side of the stage, his fingers brushing the envelope inside his pocket. Our eyes met across the hall. He gave the faintest nod. A flicker of heat surged in my chest, the tiniest ember of hope. Emily, too, distracted by her own performance, didn't notice. She leaned into Andrew, laughing loudly, making a show of their perfect union. But I noticed something else. When the lawyer had slid the black folder toward me earlier, a sheet had slipped loose. For a brief second, I caught a glimpse of the title printed in bold transfer of property, Maple Street Residence, and beneath it a line left blank for my signature. Yet there was something strange. On the back of the sheet, faint but visible, were markings, my handwriting. I recognized it instantly, because weeks ago, when I'd made a copy of my house deed at the courthouse, the clerk had handed me the original back with a thin slip attached, certified. Do not duplicate. That slip with my signature had pressed faintly onto another page, and now, here it was, on the back of the lawyer's form, meaning what they were trying to force on me wasn't legitimate. A forged document. A trick. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I was too old, too frail, too uneducated. But I noticed. I looked up at the lawyer, whose forehead had started to bead with sweat under the chandelier lights. His eyes darted to Andrew, then to Patricia, then back to me. Interesting. I said nothing. Not yet. Instead, I folded my hands calmly in my lap as though I had already accepted defeat. Let them think I was broken. Let them think I was weak. Because weakness can be the best disguise. Meanwhile, Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, "what did you see?" I smiled faintly, patting her hand. "Patience, sweetheart. Patience." She frowned, confused, but trusted me enough not to press. The guests returned to their meals, though the tension in the room lingered like smoke after a fire. Emily had won for now. She laughed, clinking glasses with Andrew's cousins, soaking in the attention, convinced her victory was complete. But inside my chest, that ember of defiance glowed brighter. I had my letter. I had my suspicions about the forged papers, and most importantly, I had time. They thought tonight would end with my signature. They thought by midnight I would be stripped of everything I had left. But the truth? Tonight was only the beginning. I glanced again at Father Thomas, who still kept the envelope tucked close to his heart. And for the first time since Emily spat her poison into that microphone, I felt the faintest smile tug at my lips. Because I knew when the right moment came, my words, my evidence, and my truth would strike harder than any of Emily's insults ever could. The rest of the reception moved on, but not for me. Every laugh, every clink of a champagne glass, every song played by the band felt like nails being hammered into the coffin Emily had prepared for me. Yet I didn't flinch. I didn't protest. I sat perfectly still, a ghost in the corner, letting them believe I was broken. Because sometimes the strongest move you can make is no move at all. Emily thrived on spectacle. She wanted me to argue, to scream, to collapse in tears so she could point and say, "See, pathetic." But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I lowered my gaze, letting the humiliation cloak me like a shroud. Guests shook their heads, whispered, pitied me, and in that pity, Emily grew bolder, thinking her power complete. But under the table, my mind was racing. I replayed every detail. The forged papers, the sweat on the lawyer's brow, the way Patricia spoke with too much certainty as if rehearsed, and of course the letter tucked safely in Father Thomas's pocket. Pieces of a puzzle scattered but waiting. I only needed patience. Lily leaned closer. "Grandma, why aren't you saying anything? Why don't you tell them the truth?" Her young voice shook with anger. I squeezed her hand gently. "Because, sweetheart," I whispered, "sometimes silence is the loudest answer. Let them laugh. Let them think they've won. That's when they make mistakes." She frowned, not fully understanding, but nodded slowly, her loyalty steady as stone. From across the room, Mrs. Evans watched me carefully. She was no fool. She knew my silence wasn't surrender. She lifted her glass slightly in my direction, a subtle toast only I noticed. Her eyes told me, "Hold on, I'm with you." As the night wore on, I began to notice cracks in the perfect image Emily tried to project. Andrew's laughter sounded forced. His eyes darted to the lawyer more than once. Patricia whispered furiously with another relative, her smile stretched too tight. They wanted this done tonight desperately. Why, if this transfer of property was as legitimate as they claimed? Why the rush? Why humiliate me publicly instead of handling it quietly in an office? Because they needed me cornered. They needed witnesses. They needed to break me down so I wouldn't dare question the legality of it all. And that meant they were hiding something. My pulse steadied. For the first time in hours, I felt in control. I slipped my hand into my purse beneath the table fingers, brushing against the small object hidden there. A silver USB drive. Weeks earlier, when Emily had asked me for documents to help with wedding planning, I'd grown suspicious. So I copied everything: house deeds, tax returns, insurance papers, even the savings account I'd quietly built from years of working double shifts at the nursing home. $127,000 tucked away in a place Emily didn't know existed. If she wanted to play dirty, she'd find out her mother knew the game just as well. The band struck up another tune, couples took the floor, and the crowd's attention shifted. Emily was busy showing off her dress, Andrew busy pouring wine into her glass. Nobody was watching me anymore. Good. I leaned toward Father Thomas as he passed by, pretending to bless tables. My lips barely moved. When the moment comes, I whispered, "Read it." His eyes flicked to mine. He gave the slightest nod, his hand brushing the envelope inside his pocket as though to reassure me. The stage was set. Emily thought she had staged my downfall in front of 200 witnesses. She thought the house was as good as hers, that my silence meant defeat. But in truth, every word, every insult, every cruel laugh had only tied the noose tighter around her own neck. I sat back, the faintest trace of a smile curling at the edge of my lips. Not joy, not triumph. Something deeper, the satisfaction of knowing that patience was about to pay off. For now, I played my role, the broken, humiliated mother at the corner table. But in my heart, I was already sharpening the blade, because soon, very soon, the tables would turn. And Emily would realize that the woman she called useless, the parasite she tried to strip bare, was the same woman who had prepared her downfall long before she walked down that aisle. The wedding ended with laughter that wasn't mine. By the time the last glass was drained and the last dance played, I was already numb. Guests whispered their goodbyes, their eyes darting toward me with pity or judgment. Emily barely spared me a glance as she swept out on Andrew's arm, her gown trailing like a banner of victory. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. 2 days later, a black Mercedes pulled up in front of my Maple Street house. Patricia stepped out first, her pearls gleaming in the morning sun, followed by Andrew in his tailored suit, and Emily in a designer coat I knew she hadn't bought with her own money. Behind them trailed the lawyer with his black folder, just as smug as he had been at the wedding. I was in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, planting late autumn chrysanthemums. The house smelled of coffee, the air crisp with October chill. It was my sanctuary, the place I had fought 40 years to hold on to. And now they were here to take it. Mother Emily said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "We need to talk." I wiped my hands on my apron and stood. About what Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. The house. It's time to make this official. The lawyer opened his folder again, sliding papers onto the porch railing as if it were a polished oak desk. "We can finalize everything right here, Mrs. Harris. All we need is your signature." I stared at the documents, fresh copies, crisp and clean, not the same ones from the wedding, but the wording was identical. "Transfer of property. You brought this circus to my home." My voice was calm, though my heart hammered inside my chest. Emily rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic, Mom. This is just business. You don't need a big house anymore. We'll give you a small condo in Lakewood. 2 bedrooms, new appliances close to the bus line. You'll be comfortable. Comfortable, I repeated, tasting the word like poison. Andrew finally spoke, his tone clipped efficient. It's a fair trade. That house is outdated. Needs a new roof, new plumbing. We'll take it off your hands before it becomes a burden. My hands tightened around the porch railing. That burden had been the only constant in my life, the one place that belonged to me. Sign, Margaret. Patricia pressed her voice sharp now. Don't drag this out. Lily, who had been visiting me that morning, peeked out from the front door. Grandma, don't do it, she shouted, her voice shaking. Emily's head snapped toward her daughter. Go back inside, Lily. This isn't your concern. It is my concern. Lily cried, tears brimming in her eyes. You're stealing from her. Patricia's lips curled. The child doesn't understand property law. I put a hand on Lily's shoulder, steadying her. Go inside, sweetheart, I murmured. I'll handle this. Reluctantly, she obeyed, but her angry little face lingered at the window, watching. The lawyer slid the pen toward me again. The sun caught the silver clip, making it gleam like a blade. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My silence stretched heavy, suffocating. The birds had stopped singing. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Emily crossed her arms. If you don't sign, Mom, you're choosing loneliness. Don't expect me to visit. Don't expect me to answer your calls. Andrew's family is my family now. You'll be nothing to me. Her words were meant to shatter me, to drive me into submission. But instead, something inside me hardened like steel. I thought of the letter in Father Thomas's hands, waiting. I thought of the forged marks I'd seen on the papers. I thought of the USB drive tucked safely in my purse, filled with copies of everything they thought I didn't understand. And I knew this was their final push, their desperate attempt to strip me bare before I could fight back. But I wasn't ready to reveal my hand, not yet. So I picked up the pen, slowly, carefully. My fingers didn't tremble this time. I let them believe I was caving in. Let them hold their breath, thinking victory was theirs. And then just as the tip touched the paper, I stopped. I set the pen down gently, folded the papers in half, and handed them back to the lawyer. Not today, I said. My voice was calm, steady, unshaken. Emily exploded. What do you mean, not today? We've waited long enough. Do you want to humiliate me again? Do you want people to think you're some selfish old hag? Clinging to a pile of bricks, Andrew grabbed her arm, trying to hush her, but she pulled away. Patricia's face flushed with anger, her pearls trembling against her neck. The lawyer stammered, Mrs. Harris, with respect, I said. I repeated, my voice rising now clear enough for Lily to hear through the window. Not today. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I turned and walked back into the house, leaving them standing on my porch like trespassers. The door clicked shut behind me. Inside, my hands shook as I leaned against the wall. My heart raced, but not from fear, from anticipation. Because I knew the time for silence was almost over. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just rattle them, it would destroy them. The Sunday after the confrontation on my porch, the church was full. The same church where Emily had stood in her white gown just a week earlier, declaring that I wasn't her real family. The same pews, the same organ pipes gleaming in the light. But this time, the air was different. Thick, waiting. It wasn't a wedding now, it was a family meeting. Patricia had called it demanding Father Thomas mediate. If Margaret refuses to cooperate, she had said, then let the community witness her selfishness. So there we were. Andrew sat stiffly in the front row, his jaw tight. Patricia perched like a queen beside him, pearls glowing lips sharp with expectation. Emily sat next to her husband, arms crossed, glaring at me as if I were some stain on her perfect dress. The lawyer hovered near the altar, black folder in hand, smug as ever. And me, I sat quietly at the end of the second pew, Lily's small hand folded into mine. Her eyes flicked anxiously from me to Emily, but I squeezed her fingers, steady, calm. Father Thomas stepped forward. His voice, calm but commanding, filled the sanctuary. Before we begin, Margaret has entrusted me with something. A letter written in her own hand, sealed weeks before this wedding. She asked me to read it only if the day came when truth was needed. Murmurs rippled across the room. Emily's face went pale, then flushed red. "What is this, Mom? Another one of your pity tricks." But Father Thomas was already breaking the seal. He unfolded the pages slowly, his eyes scanning the words, and then he began to read. "My name is Margaret Harris. For 71 years I have lived with dignity, though my daughter may call me useless. I scrubbed floors, served coffee, and patched roofs so she would never feel hunger, so she could walk into her schools with her head high. I worked nights at the nursing home, double shifts, just so she could wear shoes that wouldn't embarrass her. But this letter is not about sacrifice. It is about truth. The Maple Street house is mine, paid for over 40 years with blood and bone, penny by penny, and though my daughter may believe it hers by entitlement, I have never signed away that right. In fact, Father Thomas paused, his eyes flicking toward the lawyer's black folder. In fact, the deed is secured, witnessed, and notarized under my name alone. Any attempt to transfer it without my consent is fraud." Gasps filled the church. The lawyer's face turned crimson. He fumbled with his folder, pulling out the papers as if to prove otherwise. But even from where I sat, I saw the faint indentation on the back page, the mark of the clerk's slip I'd kept. Father Thomas continued, "But that is not the only matter. Over the years I built something else. Quietly, patiently. While my daughter dismissed me as weak, I saved $127,000 stored in an account she does not know, a safety net she cannot touch. And should she attempt to strip me bare, I have left instructions with my lawyer, my real lawyer, that all assets will bypass her entirely and go to my granddaughter Lily Harris." The church erupted. Emily shot to her feet. "What?" Her shriek bounced off the stained glass windows. "You can't do that. You promised me." Her voice cracked. Shrill panicked. Patricia hissed, trying to pull her back down. Andrew's eyes widened, his calm facade finally cracking. The lawyer stammered, clutching his folder like a shield. Father Thomas raised his hand for silence. His voice cut through the chaos. "This letter was witnessed and dated before the wedding. The truth is clear. Margaret is not weak. She is not alone. And any attempt to coerce her into signing fraudulent papers is not only immoral, it is criminal." A man in the back row stood. A stranger to most, but not to me, Mr. Reynolds, the notary clerk from the courthouse. He lifted a stamped document high. "I have the certified deed right here. Margaret Harris is the sole owner." I stamped it myself. "Any other papers are forgeries." The room exploded in whispers. Emily's face drained of all color. Patricia clutched her pearls, furious but speechless. Andrew muttered something under his breath, his hand raking through his hair. The lawyer slammed his folder shut and slunk back a step. Lily gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. But this time they weren't from fear. She squeezed my hand so tight I thought she'd never let go. "Grandma, you won." I sat taller, my chin lifted. For the first time in years, I felt the weight slide off my shoulders. Emily stumbled forward, her voice desperate now. "Mom, I didn't mean it. Please, you know I love you. I just wanted us to have something better. I thought—" Her words fell apart in the silence. No one believed her anymore. Patricia snapped Emily, "Sit down." But Emily's legs wobbled, her mask shattered. The bride who had once stood radiant and cruel now looked like a child caught stealing. I rose slowly, every eye in the church following me. For years I said, my voice steady, "You called me useless, parasite, nothing. But today you see the truth. I am not nothing. I am not weak. And you will not take from me what I bled to earn." The silence that followed was absolute, and in that silence Emily crumbled. Emily's knees buckled as she sank back into the pew, her wedding ring catching the light like a mocking reminder of the life she thought she had secured. The crowd stared, whispers rising like storm winds, every pair of eyes cutting her down more than any insult I could deliver. Andrew was the first to break the silence. He stood, his face red with anger. "What the hell, Emily? You told me it was done. You told me the house was yours." His voice carried through the sanctuary, harsh, accusing. Emily whipped toward him. Panic splashed across her face. I thought Mom always said—" "You lied," Andrew snapped. You dragged me and my family into this circus with your lies." Patricia stood abruptly, her pearls trembling on her chest. "This is an embarrassment," she hissed, glaring at Emily as though she were a stranger. "Do you realize what you've done? You've humiliated us in front of the entire congregation. People will talk. They'll never stop talking." Already they were. Guests murmured, shaking their heads, some glaring openly at Emily and Patricia. "Greedy," someone whispered. "Ungrateful," another said. The lawyer, so smug just an hour before, snapped his folder shut with a loud crack and muttered, "I want no part of this." He hurried out of the church, his face pale, his career likely in jeopardy now that fraud had been spoken aloud in a house of God. Emily buried her face in her hands, but Andrew wasn't done. He stepped back from her, his voice cold. "You told me we'd start married life with property in our name. You said your mother would hand it over without a fight. That was the deal." His eyes cut toward me, then back to her. "If this is how you treat the woman who raised you, what will you do to me?" The sting of betrayal now turned back on her. Emily's tears streamed down mascara, staining her cheeks, but her words stumbled out weak and broken. "Andrew, please. I just wanted us to have security. A house. Something of our own." Patricia scoffed, her voice icy. "You wanted our approval. That's all. You threw your own mother under the bus for it, and now look at you. A disgrace." Emily reached for Andrew's hand, but he stepped back, shaking his head. The distance between them was wider than the pews. The whispers in the crowd grew louder, sharper. Old Mrs. Klein, who had known me for decades, shook her head with disgust. "Imagine calling your own mother a parasite. In church, no less." "Ungrateful girl," muttered Mr. Carter from the back. "That house wouldn't stand without Margaret's sweat." One by one, the guests turned away from Emily, the glow of her wedding gown dimming under their judgment. No more admiration, no more applause, only shame. Lily, still clutching my hand, stood a little taller. Her young voice rang out, trembling, but fierce. "Now you all see. My grandma isn't weak. She's the strongest person here." The church fell silent again. For a moment, no one dared breathe. Then a few guests began to nod. Someone clapped softly, then another, until the sound swelled, not for Emily, not for Andrew, not for Patricia. For me. Emily's sobs grew harsher, her shoulders shaking. She hid her face, but nothing could shield her from the truth now. The perfect image she had tried to craft shattered like glass, leaving only shards that cut her deeper with every stare. Patricia turned her back on her new daughter-in-law, her lips tight with disgust. "Come, Andrew," she said coldly. "We have no business here." But Andrew lingered for one moment longer, his eyes hard on Emily. "If you can betray your own blood, Emily, then you can betray anyone." His words landed like stones, final, irrevocable. Then he followed his mother out, leaving Emily alone in the pew, surrounded by whispers. The priest closed the letter gently and looked at me. His eyes were soft, almost proud. "The truth has been spoken," he said quietly. I knotted my throat tight, but I stood tall, because in that moment, justice had finally found its way. Emily had taken everything she thought I was weak, pitiful, disposable, and thrown it back in her own face. She had tried to strip me of dignity, of home, of identity, and instead she had stripped herself of family respect and love. The scales had balanced, and the satisfaction that pulsed through my veins wasn't joy, it was something deeper. The raw, undeniable relief of knowing that sometimes in the end, the cruel carve their own downfall. When the church finally emptied, the silence left behind was almost holy. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, painting the floor in colors of red and gold, as if heaven itself had stamped its seal on what had just happened. Emily remained in the front pew, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. No one went to her, not Andrew, not Patricia, not even the cousins who once swarmed around her like bees to honey. She was alone. I stood slowly, Lily's hand still tucked into mine. Her eyes shone with pride, with relief, with something that felt like victory. "Grandma," she whispered, "you showed them. You showed everyone." I smiled softly, brushing a curl from her forehead. It wasn't about showing them, sweetheart. It was about reminding myself. We walked to the altar where Father Thomas waited. He placed the folded letter back into my hands, his eyes kind. "The truth has a way of cutting deeper than any insult," he said quietly. I nodded, slipping the letter into my purse. "Thank you for being my witness," I murmured. As we stepped outside, the October air hit my face crisp and cool. For the first time in years, I breathed deeply, without the weight of shame, without the fear of what tomorrow might strip away. The Maple Street house still belonged to me. My savings were safe, and most importantly, my dignity, so long trampled, stood tall again. But it wasn't the property or the money that mattered most. It was something simpler, something harder to buy or steal: respect. For decades, I had mistaken silence for strength, endurance for love. I thought sacrifice would speak louder than words that Emily would one day understand without me ever needing to say it. But silence doesn't always teach. Sometimes it only gives others permission to step harder on your back. That night, when she called me a parasite in front of 200 guests, I felt destroyed. But the truth, I wasn't destroyed. I was finally awake. Awake to the fact that no parent should have to beg for love from their own child. Awake to the truth that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and care. And as I looked at Lily clutching my hand with fierce devotion, I realized that my legacy was never meant for Emily. It was meant for the next generation, the one who still believed in me, who still saw me as more than useful, more than necessary, simply loved. At 71, I no longer cared about being invited to sit at the grand table or about being called part of someone else's real family. I cared about this, that when I left this world, I would not leave it, bowed, broken, or silent. I would leave it with my head held high, my voice heard, my truth written down. As we walked down the church steps, Mrs. Evans hurried to meet me. She pressed my hand tightly. "You showed courage, Margaret," she said. "You reminded every parent here of their worth." Her words sank deep, because that was what this story had become, not just mine, but every mother's, every father's, every grandparent's who had ever been called useless after a lifetime of sacrifice. I turned to Lily, my voice low but strong. "Promise me something, sweetheart. What Grandma promised me, you'll never let anyone tell you your worth. Promise me you'll remember respect is not given freely. It's demanded. Not through shouting, not through cruelty, but through living with dignity, no matter what they take from you." Lily nodded her eyes, wet, her little chin lifting. "I promise." And in that moment, I knew everything I had endured, all the years of silence, of sacrifice, of pain, had led to this lesson. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about reminding the world we, the ones who raised you, who built the roofs you sleep under and paid the bills that kept the lights on, we are not weak. We are not useless. We don't need your pity. We only need your respect. So as Emily wept alone in the church, she had turned into a theater of humiliation. I walked out into the sunlight with Lily's hand in mine, my back straight, my heart steady. No victory parades, no cheering crowds, just the quiet, unshakable truth. Sometimes the loudest triumph is silence, and mine rang louder than any insult Emily could ever throw.